Here we are again.
Welcome. Waking Mad.
Waking Mad. So, Waking Madness is a good title, I think, because it's about that flipping assumptions on their head. The nature of a paradox.
Yep.
Being that it's mutually contradicting but true at the same time.
Yep.
And it begs more questions than it gives answers. And so, Waking Mad is the idea that everyone's mad when they wake up, sort of thing. And maybe dream worlds and altered states of consciousness and
Experiences, phenomena.
are actually the true reality.
Yep.
And let that just be an idea, a philosophical postulate.
And the
What
question, what if?
We're not saying it is that way, but what if it is that way? And we were talking about this on a previous recording, Jess, didn't we? Where people who don't have a neurosis, so to speak, who don't react with some kind of mental health issue, at least a stress issue, or a anxiety or depression, or indeed a traumatic response to the world we live in, maybe it's the case that there's something really wrong with them, because how could you not? I mean, the kinds of horrors that we are exposed to on a daily basis, whether they be subtle or profound or extreme, you know, the death of 1,000 cuts, or a major hammer blow, so to speak. If you didn't react to that, is there something majorly autistic or psychopathic? You know, with all due respect to people with autism or indeed psychopathy, but what empathy is there?
It's also mad that none of this is approachable for discussion in the world. And
You mean a critique of what is mad or not mad?
The critique of what is mad, or the critique of these experiences, and phenomena. Like, you'd have to be mad to shut this out and not approach it and think that it's nothing, and you know, it's so limiting, restrictive. Yeah, so it's about waking madness. It's about defining what madness is.
You'd have to be mad to be limited by a paradigm which may be a very small slice of reality or a small frequency. It'll be like not wanting to cross the road to see what's on the other side, or not wanting to try a different meal, like to cook dinner in a different way. Having this routinized kind of perspective, got to be fear-based.
It's got to be fear-based, and fear is huge, as I believe we've discussed.
To what
before.
extent is your reality, all of our realities, constrained due to fear? Fear of the unknown. So I don't try new things or do new things or question philosophically, because I'm scared of what the effect might be. You know, the idea of a little knowledge is dangerous, or dangerous questions.
Yes.
Well, you shouldn't be asking those questions. I think of the Stasi and, you know, communist East Germany, you know, shutting down people who ask questions. Can't question the state.
No, it's a bit like that. And people police themselves, you know, because they don't want to be different. They want you to be the same, you know, because if you're different, then I have to change. And maybe I'm wrong and the way that I live is wrong. And that's scary when you think about it, you know.
Yeah, people can be very defensive regarding criticism at the best of times. Have you ever had an argument with someone, and an argument, I think to you and I, Jesse, is actually a discussion. An argument is actually a philosophical discussion where you have point for counterpoint. I think it was Hegel, Hegel's dialectics. Hegel, a philosopher, stated you have a thesis, a diathesis, and a synthesis resulting. As in, you have a point, a counterpoint, and some kind of a summarial conclusion where both counterpoints in a debate grow from the experience. What's the defensive posturing about when you want to know more? It's fear-based.
It's fear-based. And when you take out fear, you're no longer restricted. You're free and open. And it's like, what's that, a quote? Sing like no one can hear you.
Dance like no one's watching.
Dance like no one's watching.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, that is beautiful. And so you must be mad not to do these things.
Yep.
Because how restrictive, how imposing, how forced and pressed down are people in their normal day lives.
And I mean, if it's okay, I would like to bring up that point we were discussing earlier, which is about feedback and self-critique, because it's apropos topical now.
Yep.
Jess and I were watching a previous podcast recording, and it became very apparent to me that I was a gesticulator, and I was moving my hands around and all this sort of stuff a lot, and I actually felt uncomfortable. Like a long uncomfortable silence when one feels inclined to interject filler. So the nature of the project itself, the Consciousness Project, Waking Mad, is affecting me. Is it affecting you?
Yes, it's affecting me. I mean, I kind of had similar reactions when I saw myself, you know, trying to explain things, and I'm like, oh no, what are you doing? But
I think it's through feedback that we become self-aware. So this is quite simpatico with the project. And we have a clash, we have a collision of our intended self, who we wish to be, how we want to be, and our actual self, how we are manifesting or appearing. Be like someone who swears a lot.
Yeah.
And it's almost like compulsive or automatic or unconscious, and they swear around, I don't know, women and children and so on. And someone comes up to them and says, you know, you swear a lot, you shouldn't be swearing. And they have to try to stop swearing. It's not to say they should or they shouldn't, they just want to.
Yeah, because they don't realize it themselves. They're not aware. And by having critique, you get that awareness, that insight to make adjustments for the better.
And you look at any training process, whether you be an athlete or a musician, an artist, or some kind of a highly trained professional, you seriously need feedback. Look at a surgeon. If a surgeon's training for 8 years after medicine is completed, he needs a hell of a lot, or she needs a hell of a lot of feedback about these surgical procedures.
Yes.
You can't just go willy-nilly and no feedback. The feedback is what procures the professional.
Yeah, but people are afraid of feedback. People are afraid to give feedback.
Or receive it, yeah.
Or receive it, exactly.
And I must admit, with this gesticulating, I felt quite uncomfortable. You know what it was? I actually looked at myself and I looked, what's the term? I looked a bit, not really effeminate, but I looked a bit camp, you know? You know, that kind of,
and
that sort of behavioural flamboyance.
Yep, flamboyance.
And I didn't know if I was very comfortable being camp.
Not that you're homophobic.
No, I'm not homophobic.
No.
I just was self-phobic. I didn't necessarily want to come across in a way which was uber flamboyant.
So is that fear-based? Does that come from fear?
It wasn't necessarily a fear-based reaction. It was more of a clash or a collision of values, or what I thought was the case. There was a beautiful little bird there too. And I didn't, even though we love humour, and it's a good way to deliver messages, we were realising in fits of laughter last night that,
so funny.
That we were really funny. When you laugh at your own jokes, that means they're funny. You know,
or you're mad.
Or you're mad. Well, we've already accepted that as, you know, we accept that. We're mad. But, you know, at the same time, the humour is a great device to deliver messages, and it makes things easier.
It does.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was thinking that we should talk about this, because let's expose it. We were daring to be courageous and honest and give it and receive feedback, which a lot of people are, I don't know, ashamed of or afraid of.
Scared, yep.
Scared, it threatens their dominant paradigm.
Yep, or just to be imposing.
So we're subverting our own paradigms in this process, trying to practice what we preach. Be the change you want to see in the world, right?
That's right. Change yourself, change the world.
So I thought I just wasn't comfortable gesticulating quite as much. It'd be like someone who is stammering or stuttering. Doesn't want to do that because it detracts from the content of their message. Whilst we still want to have humour, maybe we need some more sober philosophical discussion as well.
Yeah.
Or is that being really boring? I don't know.
Don't know.
You see the impact of critique? Once you receive it, the feedback, even this is self-critique, you've got to deal with it.
Yeah, so please give us all the feedback.
You sure that you want feedback?
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Just give feedback to him then. So I was thinking about hegemonic masculinity, because we're two men, and the gesticulating and so on that I was doing in the campness was not quite hegemonic masculine. And then I was thinking about how, in actual fact, I'd actually shed that hegemonic masculinity. I wasn't so concerned about it. I'd thrown it off when I started to become more comfortable and independent in my life, dare I say it, a bit more worldly, wise and street smart and a little bit sophisticated. You know, you get better as you do better, as you know better, and you move on.
Feedback.
I wasn't so worried about fitting into this notion of hegemonic masculinity, that, you know, the status quo, typical bloke man. I wasn't so worried, and I let it go. I was unshackled, and I was just letting myself be myself, which was clearly a bit of a gesticulating, flamboyant person. I felt like I should have been wearing a cravat.
It's amazing how powerful these programs that get installed to you at an early age. And you see it from the influences of your father or other male role models. We're talking about masculinity here. Can apply to the feminine side as well.
You were talking about your own experience with this, weren't you?
Yeah.
Because I experienced a lot of pressure to fit in, to be a typical Aussie bloke, and I'm sure it's the same for Englishmen and American men and, you know, men all over the world. But to sort of overcompensate, in a sense, to make sure you are blokey enough.
Yeah.
And how much we've come a long way since then, but I was still conditioned in that way. And I think that involves quite a lot of self suppression or oppression.
Yeah.
What did you notice about your experience with masculinity and your journey towards, well, what I'm seeing is a far more gentle, spiritual approach to living?
Yes, very gentle. That's basically, I think about things and I'm aware of things and how can I do it and approach it gently. But that's been a long time coming, through years of observation of self and others, and interactions between others, and
self-observation is a kind of feedback, really.
It is. Well, it is a feedback. Exactly.
Sometimes we're uncomfortable with what we see.
Yeah. So you don't need to get feedback from others. We can give feedback to ourselves. You know, and that's really important. And what I've noticed is that I was trying to fulfill these images, these male stereotype images, archetype images, where I need to be manly, I need to be masculine, I need to be aggressive, I need to be controlling, because not to do that means not to be a man, which means not to be successful, which means not to be accepted. You know, all these things are really powerful. It means not to be my father, who is this successful in terms of that is alive and he's done well. You know, and all this comes out.
He's also our father's a bit of a he's got a lot of aspects to himself. He's very dynamic.
Very dynamic.
I think it's a good term.
Yes.
Even what's the other term? It'll come to me in a minute. But you know, a part of him is an alpha male.
Yep.
And you know, hegemonic masculine. Then there's a part of him which is, you know, very nurturing and loving and healing and caring, and it's quite an enigma, really. But yeah, so growing up with that kind of masculine.
Yeah, and so when in every interaction,
modeling,
if you're not aware, you're not self-observing these occurrences when they happen all the time. Every interaction, even yourself, where you're thinking and feeling. You know, oh, I feel sad. Oh, I got to cut that out and remove it. You know, and then it came to a point where I was having an argument with my partner, and at that time I realized that I was not okay being weak or being that I can't handle things.
And you became very angry?
Yeah, I became very angry.
Argument, yeah?
Yeah, I was very angry in an argument, yeah. So
we're not talking about a philosophical argument, we're talking about a fight.
Yeah, And I hated it every time. I knew inside somewhere, covered up in all this these images, that it was wrong and I didn't want to do this, but I couldn't. I drowned it out. This subtle communication, I drowned it out. And then I tapped into it, bam. And I realized instantly, it came up, I felt this mass emerging from my chest. And I went into the kitchen, and over the kitchen this thing was coming out of me like vomiting, but this energy mass coming out. And it kept coming, and I was weeping and weeping as I'm realizing all these, every time I suppressed or was not myself, i.e. not while being these images, they were adding to this cluster, dark cluster.
So this kind of tacked on hegemonic masculinity that you were aspiring to conform to based on the social modelling pressure that you were experiencing, was adding to this almost like disingenuous sense of self, which was kind of like an energetic form of a cancer or something.
Yeah, it's very physical as it's coming out.
And that's because it wasn't really who you are.
Yeah, it wasn't who I am. And so it came out, and I just cried and cried, and I said, I said to my partner, darling, I'm so sorry. I love you with all my heart. I really want to work this out. I'm going to stop trying to get what I want and just listen.
It's almost like you becoming more vulnerable.
Well, that's it.
Surrendering and letting go, being a little bit more passive.
Yes.
Not becoming a woman.
No.
Not becoming feminine. It's almost like letting go of uber masculinity. This need to power and control.
Yep.
This need to dominate and conquer. I mean, maybe it's the case that men are being oppressed as well by masculine uberness.
They say all this feminist movement,
overcompensating. Yeah.
There's feminist movements, and I put it to you that men are suffering just as much, in the sense that they can't be themselves. Like, you think about it, they must have a job, they have to be a man.
Yeah, whilst we're oppressed by, the collective mankind in terms of, peer pressure and stuff like that, unlike women or unlike other, minority groups, we don't have anyone to face. I mean, we can face the machine, like, Rage Against the Machine, great band. Mm-hmm. We can face the machine and protest that, if you will, which oppresses us. You could talk about corporate multinationalism or non-representative fascist government or something like that. But in actual fact, when it comes to this masculinity gig, we have to actually stand up to ourselves. We've got to face ourselves. I'm going to protest against myself.
Yeah.
Really. Because we're keeping ourselves in this this sort of prison. And don't get me wrong, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are many aspects to masculinity which are worth conserving.
Yeah, it was the yin and the yang, right?
But it's the balance.
Yeah, it's the elephant and the rider, and it's everything works in relation.
Yeah.
But we want to let moderation.
We want to let go of these overcompensating aspects of masculinity that are actually just stopping us from being vulnerable, from surrendering, where there's actually a lot of strength in that.
There's so much strength, but it's very scary. It's scary because we're taught that it's scary, and the only reason why we don't be vulnerable, is because we've been taught to, we've been installed to. We haven't really had anything to compare to. All our role models.
People say, I don't want to be vulnerable, or that'll make me too vulnerable. Hello, newsflash, you're already vulnerable.
Yes.
Okay, we're all vulnerable. It's like you stand out in the sun, you get burnt. You fall in love, you can get burnt emotionally. Yep. You can get rejected, you can be hurt, you can feel inadequate, you can be humiliated. You can feel unloved. You can feel powerless and helpless in a situation where there's nothing you can do to change the outcome.
Yep.
The only solution when that happens is to accept it, to surrender it, to accommodate it, which you could say is traditionally a feminine virtue.
Yep.
Whereas masculine tends to be more about outcome-oriented, competitive, willful, logic-based, fierce, achievement of that goal. I would liken it to the man being the hunter and the woman being the gatherer. The traditional woman being, or feminine aspect of spirit, if you will, being relational, nurturing, process oriented rather than outcome oriented. But I think that if you can combine those within the human being,
Male or female?
not the man or the woman, but the human being, I've got this feminine aspect which is relational, process-based, nurturing, and you could say emotional, right-brained as well, creative even. Whereas the man within me, or I'm getting the terms confused, the masculine part of me, the yin-yang stuff, the masculine part of me is logic-based. It's outcome-informed. It's a bit more solitary, and logic left-brained, if you will.
Yeah.
But when you combine those two together, it's like a sacred marriage within yourself.
Yeah. So practice being vulnerable. Don't be scared. It's limiting. It's unhealthy. Otherwise, you're trying to control something or change something. But change is not your right. Change is a shared thing. I think it's a very important.
It's a wonderful,
important lesson I learned.
Sure, man. Well, look, you're feeling much more comfortable now.
I am very comfortable.
You're more able to deal with things that you can't change. It likens to that prayer, which I think is used in Al-Anon, where it's a prayer for help or whatever, guidance. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That to me is yin yang.
Yeah.
The courage to change the things I can, I would say, is a masculine component. The serenity to accept the things I cannot change, you could say, is a feminine component.
Mm-hmm.
And the wisdom to know the difference is like that combination.
The combination.
Or the philosophical, the philosopher within both masculine and feminine.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that.
And I mean, look, like in the feminine component, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, liken that to a woman in labour. She's got to go through it. The baby can't be half out, and she's like, "I'll put it back in. I'm fed up with this. I want to go home." Sorry, you have to accept it. It is what it is. So, I was also thinking in that podcast, the gesticulation stuff, it made me also think, this is more about feedback, moving on from masculinity. We've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left, but that's cool. That we can cover up and mask other energies. And I was thinking back to my experience when I was a child, experiencing trauma and really manifesting, the condition post-traumatic stress disorder, which really wasn't known about in the 70s and 80s, not commonly anyway. And, I experienced this post-traumatic stress disorder, which manifested into various kinds of crisis points for me. A lot of anxiety, a lot of obsessive-compulsive traits, and this sort of Tourette's syndrome, which is a genetic predisposition probably activated by an environmental stress or trigger, which definitely, I think, I fit the bill. So I would, make these jerk movements. This is when I'm like 5, 6 years old. I'd make these jerk movements with my head. I'd make them with my eyes, a lot of blinking. I'd move my hands in certain ways. I'd make noises.
Yeah.
I remember there was this time I couldn't, and this is so compulsive that I couldn't help it. I would look at the sun all the time, and it got to the point where it affected my vision. I would like shake my hand a lot, and it got to the point where I sprained my wrist and had to wear a wrist guard. I'm quite vulnerable in expressing this to you now because I was ashamed of it. I remember someone at school called me, when it manifested, because it went away and came back, this Tourette's thing. Someone, called me goggly eyes or something like that, because I'd blink my eyes a lot. And I think it was all based on a discharge of tension, a discharge of built up energy in the form of making a movement or a sound, rather than just keeping it all suppressed like some kind of pressure cooker. And in some ways with Tourette's syndrome, it's that coprolalia, fuck off, and it just comes out like that all the time, the swearing. And I was researching this a bit more lately, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think the gesticulating that I tend to do is actually a masked discharge. It's a socially acceptable way of discharging energy. And you could look at the same thing with smoking. I used to be a smoker. So smoking is a way where you have a compulsive activity, where Tourette's and obsessive compulsive tendencies, you know, an outcome from trauma, unresolved trauma, can hide.
Yeah.
And similarly, you know, drinking alcohol, or any compulsive activity where someone's like constantly training at the gym, or a martial artist, or, you know, a fencing athlete, or something like that, where you've got to do it to the absolute nth degree, because you're really channeling this discharging of energy coming from underlying frustration and stress and trauma. And I was researching this a bit more recently, and when people do have head jerks, which would traditionally be known as you know, Tourette syndrome, uncontrollable jerking of the body spasmodically, it's actually going back to the original trauma, and I believe this is called sensory motor therapy or something like that. But basically, if I jerk my head around like that, I'm actually startled. I'm startling. I'm going through the startle response, and I'm orientating myself to threat, the perceived source of threat.
Fight or flight.
And this goes back to the fight or flight response to threat, where it's an automatic and mammalian response, reflexive for survival. And so just say I had something thrown at me, I startle, reflexively, without thinking. And trauma is often involving threat to life or limb of self or other, putting yourself in their shoes, or it's happening to you directly. Abuse, assault, a fatal car accident or something like that. And you can see how the head jerk is actually a orientation to threat.
Like hearing a sound in the distance.
That's right.
Bang.
Seeing what's going on. When you've been traumatized, you get stuck in that sort of loop. You get stuck in that vicious circle that's self-propagating.
It's like you carry the trauma with you.
You carry the trauma with you, and your body hasn't finished
Resolving.
the traumatic fight or flight threat-based response, and you're constantly orientating to threat.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I think Tourette syndrome largely is. And what we can help people do, and this can be insidious traumas as well, which are emotional, psychological abuse or whatever over time, and not necessarily out and out, you know, car crashes and watching people die and stuff like that. There can be all kinds of, you know, death of 1,000 cuts type of abuse, or, you know, an axe blow abuse. But what we want to do in therapy is actually help the person mindfully go through the range of motion, explaining to them that the body is simply trying to complete the response to threat, the orientation to threat response, the startle, slow it down, and you get this complete and utter completion of the threat, fight or flight response, the orientation to threat response, and it's done.
As opposed to trying to stop it when it happens, because I know I've suffered from some of these as well, and when I've tried to stop it because it's embarrassing,
that's it, we feel shame.
Yeah.
Because people laugh at you and go, look at that funny person, you know, you feel shame and you feel self-conscious, so you inhibit it, and you effectively, based on your reaction to it, this is where feedback comes in again, you stop yourself from completing the response, and you make yourself stuck.
And often what I've found is that it transfers to something different. Like you might have a head twitch like this, and you stop the head twitch, and then you might develop this tick in your hand. You know, so
something more socially acceptable.
Or if you're choosing,
or more subtle, or hidden.
But it's still happening. So you haven't resolved anything if you try and suppress and control it.
Its energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes form. And what we need is to discharge the energy, to let it go. If we don't, we contain it, and it just changes form. You might become a compulsive sexual person. You might become an alcoholic, or a habitual smoker, because you're actually containing the obsessive compulsive or Tourette's traumatic response in a more socially acceptable behaviour. It's not to say all Tourette's is traumatic based.
No.
I believe it's probably a heterogeneous disorder where other things cause it as well, and it's very brain based as well. But let's remember that the brain, it responds to environmental changes. So if you change the information, this is how therapy works. You change the information, you change the understanding, you know, by talking and processing about something, or indeed, you know, understand new ways to do things or do things differently. The brain has to back that up. in the flesh, and it actually does sprout new neurotransmitter pathways.
What's the time?
It's 7 minutes past.
Okay.
So, in closing, if you will, that's another example of shame, whether it be hegemonic masculinity or some kind of underlying condition based on trauma, which is, in this case, we're discussing Tourette's or obsessive compulsive disorder is a behavioural transference of that energy from Tourette's. You know, where you have to do things obsessively and compulsively. You worry a lot about something, you have an intrusive thought pattern, and you discharge it, at least that, by doing something compulsively, like washing your hands a lot, or checking behaviour, checking the oven 10 times, or switching things off, the
Tapping,
lights
yeah.
and 5 times before you turn the light on and off, and tapping things and all this sort of thing. You know, not stepping on cracks. But of course, that's self-propagating. The compulsion just reinforces that, you know, the obsession needed the compulsion to be neutralised, and the obsession builds up again. And that's actually a distraction from underlying problems. When I work with people with OCD, having suffered from it myself in the past, now very much resolved, I'm proud to say, there's always some kind of underlying cause, you know, behind the worry. And the obsessive compulsive stuff, like a fear of germs or danger or the house burning down, it's almost like either a direct result of past trauma, or it's a cover-up for a deeper trauma.
So, yeah,
that hasn't been resolved.
Usually some sort of trauma that you carry with you because you haven't resolved it, and it manifests.
Trauma's just everywhere.
Trauma's everywhere.
That's what I mean. If you don't manifest some kind of neurosis or whatever in this world, you're the real mad person. Or maybe you've had extraordinarily good luck, which God bless you for that.
Yes.
So what do you think? Have you?
That's good. Thanks for listening.
I think we've got our point across.
Yeah.
This is Waking Mad.
This is Waking Mad.